Now resume.
Morning, Mr. Commissioner. Today you have before you the second panel on the hearings dealing with hydro, water flow, and temperature. I'll just introduce the panel to you starting on my left. We have Lynn Krywolken and Glenn Davidson, both from the province of British Columbia. Jason Wong, who you'll be familiar with, he's been here before. Finally, Paul Higgins, who is from BC Hydro. If the witnesses could be sworn, please.
Good morning. Can you turn on your microphone, please? Thank you. I solemnly affirm that the evidence to be given by you to this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I will.
I will.
Yes, I will.
Yes, I do.
State your name, please.
Lynn Krywolken.
Yep.
Glenn Davidson.
Yep.
Jason Wong.
Yep.
Paul Higgins.
Counsel.
If we could have our tab 13 up, please, Ms. Panchuk. We'll start with you, Mr. Davidson. We have your biography on the screen there. You have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from UBC.
I do, yes.
And you're a registered professional engineer.
Yes, I'm currently, yes.
You've worked for the province of British Columbia for
Yes.
You've been with the province since 1994, working in the area of water resources and land use policy.
Since 1988.
1988, thank you. You're currently the Director of Water Protection and Sustainability Branch for the Environmental Sustainability Division of the Ministry of Environment.
That's correct.
And you're the provincial lead on Water Act modernization.
Yes.
Ms. Krywolken's CV, which is on the screen, could be the next exhibit, please.
1867.
Thank you. Could I have exhibit 647 on the screen, please? Mr. Wong, you've been here before, but just to remind the Commissioner, you hold a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Simon Fraser University.
Yes.
And a diploma in Fisheries, Wildlife, and Recreation from BCIT.
That's right.
You've been with DFO in its Habitat Division since 1994.
Yes.
And you're currently the Area Manager of the Ecosystems Management Branch in the BC Interior.
Yes.
A position which you've held since 1990 or since 2006.
That's correct.
And you're responsible for managing DFO's involvement within the Chaco watershed.
Not singularly, but yes.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Higgins, you hold a bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Science, specializing in ecology from SFU.
Yes, I do.
And a master's degree in natural resource management, also from SFU.
Yes, I do.
And you've been with BC Hydro for 19 years, holding a number of positions.
That's correct.
Your current position is as manager of the environment program for the Site C Clean Energy Project.
That's true.
From 2004 to 2010, however, you were the manager of the Environmental Resources Department.
That's correct.
Mr. Higgins' CV is on the screen. If that could be the next exhibit, please.
1868.
Thank you. Mr. Davidson, I'm going to start with you. Some questions about the issuing of water licenses. You told the Commissioner when I was asking questions about your qualification that you're the water comptroller for the province. I wonder if you could just briefly explain to the Commissioner what that position entails.
The Water Act has a variety of decision makers identified. I would characterize the controller of water rights as sort of the senior decision maker with regard to issuing water licenses, orders. There's a number of sort of powers under the Act that are identified that the controller is responsible for. So think of it as the senior decision maker under the Water Act.
And is one of those responsibilities or the ability to issue licenses for water extraction from
Yes.
streams and rivers, including those in the Fraser watershed?
The controller and regional water managers can do that, yes.
Okay. You're ultimately the chief person in charge of issuing water licenses in the province?
Yeah, the roles are similar between regional water managers and controller when it comes to water license issuing, yeah.
Okay. Where does the comptroller look when attempting to identify criteria which ought to be considered prior to issuing a water license?
You get direction from a number of I guess documents. I mean, the senior piece is the Water Act. I mean, you have to adhere to the Water Act and the regulations around issuing licenses. But there's a lot of also other internal sort of guidelines for issuing, guidelines for water use, guidelines for fish flows, guidelines for a number of things associated with water licensing and water use.
Okay, if we're speaking of legislation and looking at the Water Act, to your understanding, does it mandate you to consider in-stream flows or impacts on fish or fish habitat when deciding whether to issue a water license?
Current Water Act, I wouldn't characterize it mandating it, it allows for it.
Okay. Is there any specific direction in the Water Act, to your understanding, that requires you to do that?
A specific direction in the Water Act that
Yes.
requires you to do that, I would say no.
Okay. Do you nonetheless in practice engage in a consideration of in-stream flows or impacts on fish or fish habitat prior to issuing a water license?
Yeah, it's pretty common in issuing any of the water licenses these days.
Do you seek, is there a document that requires it, or is that a practice that's developed over time?
It's a practice that's developed over time, and say in modifications of the Water Act, it's allowed for it.
Okay. When considering matters related to fish or fish habitat, when making decisions about issuing water licenses, do you consult with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans?
Yeah, we consult with our fisheries folks, with our Ministry of Environment, as well as DFO, and other consultants working on that issue.
Does that happen as a matter of course? Is it a routine engagement before issuing a water license?
Yeah, it depends on the size of the license, but it is quite routine, yes.
Does the province of British Columbia have in place a program requiring reporting on water use by licensees?
I wouldn't say there's an across-the-board program that requires water use. Some licenses require water use because of their terms and conditions in the license. Some require water use because of the way we bill for water licenses. So it depends on the size of the license and the requirements of each specific license, but I wouldn't say across-the-board reporting, no.
Can you give the Commissioner any sense of what proportion of water licenses in this province require reporting on consumption?
Well, there's 44,000 water licenses in the province, and roughly half of those are for domestic use, and they don't require reporting. So it's something less than half. I'm not sure if I could guess, but it's probably more, maybe a quarter of the licenses.
Okay. Does the province engage in monitoring of water use by any licensees?
There's a number.
Independent monitoring.
Yeah, so the individual licensees are required to report water use or conditions. The province also does some audits of certain licenses, so there is some of that, and there's also some independent, sort of stream flow analysis. I mean, many of the stream flows exist downstream of projects, so if there's requirements to release certain flows, we verify that by some of the federal provincial network as well.
Threshold above which, if a license is of a certain size, is there a certain size above which monitoring requirements or reporting requirements would be triggered?
There's nothing specific I would say that triggers that, or no sort of guidelines like that. I would say that it's the larger licenses that require monitoring. Certainly the hydroelectric sector comes to mind. Some of the big water users, some of the big industrial users, some of the water users communities or water supply facilities require that. It's part of their billing as well.
If, as you've told us, the majority of water license holders in the province aren't required to report on their use, how in practice does the province ensure compliance with the water license and ensure that the limits that are prescribed in the license are not exceeded?
I'd say you mentioned the compliance and the monitoring, so there's one method that we use, and we really focus that on the big users. The smaller users, they tend to be, we tend to address that more on I don't want to say a complaint or problem business. I'm thinking of the small domestic users. Usually there might be several users in one stream, so often if folks are taking more than their allotted requirement, you'll get some complaints that you'll have to investigate. So it's either policing by their neighbors, if you will. So it's looking into problems for the most part.
Thank you. Mr. Huang, does the Department of Fisheries and Oceans habitat section engage in monitoring water withdrawals or the impacts of water withdrawals on fish or fish habitat?
Yeah, a little bit.
I wonder if you can explain to the Commissioner the extent to which the department engages in that in the Fraser watershed.
Well, within the BC Interior operating area, for example, we've got about 16 practicing habitat staff, and out of that, a small proportion of those staff's time is assigned to monitoring stream flow conditions in areas where we've got high salmon values and known limitations on water supply, especially in dry years. So we have some ongoing monitoring that we do jointly with the province and other partners. and we are also involved on a bit more of a circumstantial basis when we find a stream is running relatively low.
Okay. Can we have Exhibit 662, please? Memorandum I think you're probably familiar with. Just to remind the Commissioner, you're the author of this document?
Yes.
And you've addressed it previously in testimony dealing with other topics?
Yes.
I'm going to take you to the second to last paragraph on this one-page document, and just ask you about your note here. The document is titled OHEB Key Issues, Habitat, and this is under the, I suppose the first words say water use dash. We have no standard like we would for things like riparian. We should set some as the department. We are also stretched beyond our limits to support various processes looking at water use and availability and have limited capacity to deliver true expertise. Many needs for data, little ability to gather data. I wonder if you could just perhaps expand on the concern you're expressing there. Tell the Commissioner if it's a concern you still hold and explain what the difficulty you face is.
Well, it's certainly a concern that we still hold. Water use and establishing needs for fish is a very complicated thing. It's difficult even in the best of times where we have a lot of data monitoring and cooperation. It's very difficult to understand the interaction between natural fluctuations in water and the additional effect of human use and activity. And the challenge we have with it is that there are thousands of streams, there's all kinds of water activity, and we've got very, very few people on the ground between our agency and the provincial ministries that are actually able to monitor and assess the habitat quality and the habitat impacts of water use.
Okay, thank you. Have you or the people working under you observed impacts to sockeye which to your observation appeared to be related to water withdrawals?
Generally not. We have seen many impacts to salmon, primarily Chinook and coho, and that's largely by nature of the streams that they live in versus the streams that sockeye live in. But we can foresee those kinds of things emerging into the future as water demand continues.
Okay. Do you work together with the province to address drought conditions which pose a threat to salmon?
Yes, we have historically, and more recently the province has established a drought response strategy, and they've invited DFO to be part of that, and we're doing our best to engage in that regard.
Okay, do you have the capacity to engage?
To a degree. I think there is more potential work that could be done in that regard than we have the capacity to work on, but we're certainly an active part of their drought response plan.
Thank you. Could we have tab 18, please? Mr. Davidson, I'm just pulling up a document on the screen. Is this the drought response plan that Mr. Huang was just referring to?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay. That's the most up-to-date version, June 2010?
It is, yes.
Okay, if that could be the next exhibit, please.
1869.
Mr. Davidson, as the comptroller, do you understand yourself to have the authority to unilaterally change existing licenses to address water scarcity?
I wouldn't say unilaterally change it. There's some conditions in a number of the licenses that we can change, that I can change as controller.
Are there licenses which do not have conditions and with respect to which you understand you're not able to change them?
There are, yeah, many of them.
You're familiar with Section 9 of the Fish Protection Act?
I am, yes.
Which I think, just for the record, provides the minister authority to restrict water use during a drought if a fish population is at risk?
Yeah, that's correct. So I would say he can go beyond what the controller can do in restricting water use.
To your observation, how often has Section 9 of the Fish Protection Act been used in recent years to address concerns surrounding drought conditions?
In the scheme of water allocation, the Fish Protection Act is a relatively new tool and has not been used much. It was used last time we had a very significant drought, which was a couple of years ago.
Okay. Mr. Wong, does the department enforce the Fisheries Act, or to your observation, have they enforced the Fisheries Act or sections of the Fisheries Act to address water withdrawals and potential impacts on fish?
Generally not, and it ties to the complexity of linking the effect of a water withdrawal to the authorities of the Fisheries Act.
I wonder if you could perhaps just explain that in a little more detail, please, for the Commissioner. The challenges associated with enforcing the Fisheries Act in the context of trying to deal with water withdrawals.
I'll try to be brief, recognizing time's limited, but the Fisheries Act isn't designed implicitly as a direct measure to manage water. The provisions that would apply would generally be Section 35, which prohibits harmful alteration of fish habitat, which can occur certainly if water is taken out of a stream to the effect that the habitat's limited, and also Section 22.3, which the minister can order the owner or occupier of a diversion or structure to have minimum flows go past that structure. So, and then there's also Section 32, which prohibits killing of fish. So none of those, all those things can potentially apply to a water withdrawal situation, but there's enormous complexity in taking those specific authorities and applying them to a water withdrawal situation. Many streams have multiple water users and have multiple points of withdrawal, multiple rates, multiple timings of withdrawal, and it's very difficult to go to a stream at any point in time that has that multiplicity kind of situation and put your finger on exactly which water user may be causing what effect. So in terms of taking the Fisheries Act and saying this particular individual did this and it harmed habitat, it's very difficult. There are occasions when you may be able to do that. And to say this particular user did this and it caused these fish to get stranded and die is also very difficult, and there's an added complexity of teasing out the effect of the human activity to whatever nature may be doing, which on occasion will dry up a stream on its own.
Right.
So that's a brief summary anyway of that complexity.
No, thank you, that clarifies it. Let me ask you this then. To your observation and based on your experience, do you feel that you and those that work under you have the regulatory tools at your disposal, that are sufficient for you to address concerns surrounding water withdrawal?
The tools we have federally are very limited and are not particularly well suited to managing water use to the benefits of fish.
Okay. Mr. Davidson, from the provincial perspective, do you have provincially the regulatory tools available such that you and those that work for you can address water withdrawals, concerns surrounding water withdrawals?
Yeah, there's a number of tools within the Water Act and the Fish Protection Act that you also mentioned. So there's a number of ways that we preserve in-stream flows, if that's what you're asking, both within the license conditions, within water reserves that are done under OIC. So there's a number of tools in there. It becomes a little bit more problematic with rights that were granted some time ago that don't have those types of provisions in them.
Do either of you have any suggestion for additional regulatory framework which may assist you in addressing concerns about water withdrawals and potential impacts on salmon?
Yeah, let me start. I mean, the province, and we're going to talk about that, I think, a little bit later about some of the Water Act modernization,
Yes,
where
we will
we're
come to
considering
that.
some of those tools. So there is some tools being proposed that we're looking into right now to look at some of these existing water allocations. The tools going forward with new water allocations are being used and are pretty good. I think that the problem primarily exists with some of the existing allocation. I think that's a way to characterize it.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, do you have anything to add to that?
I think currently, and linking into the Water Act modernization, a big thing that would help would be to have mandatory metering and monitoring. Because right now you can go out to a licensed water user, many of the older historic ones, and you don't know how much they've taken today, how much they've taken this year, and how that effect may or may not be contributing to the current circumstances in a stream. So having some sense of that would then allow more regulatory control, I think.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to turn now to the issue of groundwater briefly. Mr. Davidson, does the province issue licenses for groundwater extraction? at
No,
present?
there's no tenuring of groundwater in British Columbia at this point.
Okay, does the province monitor the extraction of groundwater?
Yeah, there is some groundwater legislation right now. It's fairly limited. It's more aimed at, I would say, the quality of the groundwater. So it's around siting and design of wells.
So is it fair to say from the answer you've just given that the province does not at present routinely monitor groundwater extraction?
No, that's not fair. The province has monitored groundwater for a number of years. We do some aquifer mapping. We've monitored groundwater levels. We own and operate a number of wells ourselves where we do track, but it tends to be more of a science exercise at this point as opposed to a rights exercise. And we've been in that business for a number of years.
Yes, I was drawing a distinction between monitoring extraction and monitoring levels.
No, we don't monitor extraction per se, no.
Okay, but you do monitor in some circumstances or some areas of the province levels.
Yes.
What has the monitoring of the levels of groundwater that is conducted by the province disclosed in terms of any trend in terms of the level of groundwater?
I mean, I wouldn't draw across the province trend, but I mean, it's certainly showing that in some areas where we have the drier areas of the province where there's heavy groundwater use and surface water use, we are seeing some decline in groundwater levels.
Thank you. Could I please have our tab 19? Just looking at this is the report of the Auditor General on the management of groundwater resources in British Columbia. You're familiar with this document?
Yes, I am.
We could please go to page 8. I'm just going to read to you, sir, some of the overall conclusions of this review under the bottom right quadrant of. Yes. Let's just see. No, I'm looking at a page that says at the bottom 2010, page 9, pardon me, yes. The bottom right quadrant under the heading Overall Conclusions. If we could just enlarge that, please. We conclude that government is not effectively ensuring the sustainability of the province's groundwater resources. Specifically, we found that the ministry's information about groundwater is insufficient to enable it to ensure the sustainability of the resource. Groundwater is not being protected from depletion and contamination or to ensure the viability of the ecosystems it supports, and control over access to groundwater is insufficient to sustain the resource, and key organizations lack adequate authority to take appropriate local responsibility. The concerns raised there are these concerns that you're familiar with?
They are, yes.
Okay. And what, if anything, is the province doing to address the concerns that were raised in this report?
The province actually has a response. The Minister of Environment at the time actually responded to this report, so there is a number of pieces contained in there. But from my point of view, a couple of these points speak specifically to quantity of groundwater and allocating or licensing groundwater. It's something that we are considering in Water Act modernization. Okay. So those two pieces, I would point to that initiative by government as something that we're, as a response to this. In terms of the information, I mean, we've long had a database system, an inventory system of groundwater. Is it adequate? I think I heard some discussion on that yesterday. I think any data on water, surface or groundwater, we could always use more. So I'm a big fan of increased hydrometric or groundwater data. Yes, it's always something to be better at.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's a nice segue perhaps into Water Act modernization. You mentioned that as one area which the province is pursuing to, at least in part, address the concerns raised here. Ms. Crywelcome, I wonder if you can just briefly explain the Water Act modernization process to the Commissioner. Tell him what that is.
So the Water Act Modernization Project initiated out of the Living Water Smart Government's Water Plan in 2008, and it's been well in play since that time. The process started off with a discussion paper that laid out a range of policy proposals and proposed solutions to a number of key themes. Government's direction on scope on that initiative focused on stream health, groundwater regulation, introducing flexibility and adaptability into the allocation system, and improving water governance arrangements.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Would you like the whole process laid out?
Well, maybe I can, you've mentioned at least one document, and maybe I'll sort of walk you through it a bit to make sure we can get a couple of the documents in. Could I have our tab 15, please? The present Water Act has been in place for quite some time, is that fair?
Yes.
And the Water Act modernization process is the process of the province of British Columbia exploring the possibility of enacting a new water legislation to replace the old Water Act, which addresses some concerns that have been raised over the years. Is that fair?
That's fair, and I would add that over the years since the Water Act first came into play, that there have been a number of improvements and enhancements as societal values and pressures on the resource have changed.
Thank you. You mentioned that the province had produced a discussion paper. This is the discussion paper you were speaking of?
That's correct.
That could be the next exhibit, please.
1870.
Just before we move on, I believe I neglected to mark the Auditor General's reports, which was our tab 19. Perhaps we could assign that an exhibit number.
1871.
Thank you. The discussion paper, which we see on the screen here, along with that, did the province also produce a technical background report that was released with the discussion paper?
That's correct.
And if we could have tab 3 from BC's list of documents. This is the technical background
Yes.
report?
Yes.
If that could be the next exhibit, please.
1872.
And were the discussion paper and the technical background report distributed for feedback and consultation?
That's correct.
And that the province did receive feedback and consultation from various stakeholders and interested parties?
Yes.
And was that feedback summarized in a report called the Report on Engagement?
Yes.
If we could have tab 4 from BC's list, please. Is this the report that reports on the engagement on the discussion paper and technical report?
Yes.
That could be the next exhibit, please.
1873.
Now, the province, in addition to consulting broadly, had some specific consultations, I take it, with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans about the discussion paper?
Yes.
Mr. Wong, were you involved in those consultations?
Not directly. Other individuals represented Fisheries and Oceans in those direct consultations, but I was part of the background group of DFO people providing some input.
Okay. Could we have our tab 17, please? Is this a document produced by the department, Mr. Wong, responding to the discussion paper and expressing some thoughts of the department on Water Act modernization?
Yes.
That could be the next exhibit, please.
1874.
I might just have a moment. Thank you. Following the consultative process, the province produced another document, which is Exhibit 1856, Policy Proposal on BC's new Water Sustainability Act. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that's this exhibit we see on the screen here.
That's correct.
I wonder if you can explain to the Commissioner what the purpose of this document is, please.
So this paper is a further convergence of the discussion paper range of policies and proposals in response to also the feedback we received from respondents through our round 2 of engagement in the spring of 2010. So it frames those 4 goals that were outlined in the discussion paper into 7 key policy directions. And those represent the essence of the proposed new Water Sustainability Act, in which we received further comment and consultation in spring 2011.
So there's been further comment and consultation on
Yes.
the intended approach set out in this policy document?
That's correct.
Okay. As a result of that additional consultation and additional work done by the province, are there any dramatic or significant changes in direction which the province is anticipating, any departures from what's set out in this document?
Well, the discussion paper, it was framed on the 4 goals that were government directed us to look at in terms of scope, and those 4 goals are still foundational to the proposal.
If you could just articulate those 4 goals, please, for the Commissioner.
The first goal is around protecting stream health and environmental flows. The second goal is protecting and regulating the groundwater resource. I'm paraphrasing here. The third goal is introducing regulatory flexibility and adaptability into the allocation system. And the fourth goal is improving water governance.
Does the direction that the province is presently planning to take with respect to Water Act modernization contemplate greater regulations or the requirement for the licensing of groundwater extractions?
Yes, that's in the proposal.
Okay. What is the province's present intention or thinking with respect to whether all groundwater extractions will require license or whether some threshold will have to be achieved first prior to the requirement being triggered?
So what the proposal speaks to is regulating large withdrawals and all withdrawals, large withdrawals province-wide and all withdrawals in priority sensitive areas. So we've laid out in the policy paper some thinking around what those thresholds might be, and our team of scientists are looking at further refining some of those thresholds so that they're easy to administer and practical and make a lot of sense. One thing I might add is that of the 90 to 95% of the wells drilled in the province are single-family domestic. And the intention is not necessarily, unless those wells are in water-short areas, to be regulating that use.
You were at the hearings yesterday.
Yes.
You heard then Dr. Orr urge upon the Commissioner the suggestion that what's needed in this province is blanket coverage for groundwater, just not for high volume or sensitive extractions. I wonder if you have a response to that and whether you can address issues relating to the potential practicality of that suggestion.
In terms of identifying a threshold to guide what's large and what's small, we're looking to a practical threshold that's easy to implement. What I'm hearing from the science and the information around the resource to regulate an individual well in west coast of British Columbia may not be practical or pragmatic. So that's why we're taking an area-based critical area approach. We know Gulf Islands, the Okanagan, local jurisdictions there are requesting regulation of groundwater and no distinction between large and small. And because those are critical areas, we're looking to tailor the proposal to address that.
Is there any reason that you're aware of that the province that would make it difficult for the province to simply institute a system like with surface water extraction requiring a license for any groundwater extraction?
The first part of your question, anything that would make it, could you?
Why couldn't the province or shouldn't the province simply institute a system requiring a license for all groundwater extraction?
Province could do that.
Okay.
And
Is there a practical reason why that would be a bad idea?
Administratively, it may be focusing on 100,000 wells rather than 5% or 10% of that.
Thank you.
The system that we're building is recognizing there's one water, that the groundwater licensing would be integrated with the surface regime.
If we could please turn to page 8 of this document. It's Exhibit 1856. One of the things Water Act modernization proposes to address, I take it, is ensuring environmental flows or adequate stream flows. Is that fair?
Yes.
I just want to read the first sentence under the heading Policy Direction Protects Stream Health and Aquatic Environments and ask you a question about it. The sentence reads, in-stream flows will be protected as an environmental value. Guidelines will be issued to determine the in-stream flow, and decision makers will be required to consider these in new water allocation decisions for both ground and surface water. It's the word new that I want to focus on in this sentence and ask you, why are these considerations only going to apply to the issuance of new licenses and not apply to existing licenses, especially in areas where the existing licenses are already causing or potentially contributing to difficulties with environmental flows?
So the statement references new in the sense that the new act, once it's enacted, henceforward, environmental flow, in-stream flows will be required to be considered. That doesn't take away from the existing tools that we have in the Water Act to address existing, we have an existing act to address in-stream flows during times of scarcity, and Mr. Davidson alluded to some of that earlier in terms of the fish clauses or in-stream flow requirements that are in modern licenses and the ability to regulate allocation and rights during times of scarcity.
At present, as I understand it, Mr. Davidson, the the approach that's taken to priority of water licensing is first in time, first in right. Is that a fair understanding?
It is. It's in British Columbia as well as most of Western North America.
Okay. Ms. Krywoken, is the province through the Water Act modernization process considering any alteration to that priority scheme?
The proposal includes a staged process that retains the first in time, first in right principle, but under extenuating circumstances gives the decision maker an opportunity to deviate from that.
What is the province doing, if anything, through Water Act modernization or other legislative or policy development to address what some have described as areas of the province which are presently oversubscribed?
One of the mechanisms that's proposed is water resource assessments and watershed sustainability plans. I've mentioned that some of the blanket province-wide provisions around in-stream flow requirements and groundwater regulation for large will be province-wide. As we get into more water-stressed areas and problem areas, the toolkit that we want to provide to decision makers expands, and that includes tools like water resource assessments and watershed sustainability plans that can apply to both existing and new licenses.
Thank you. Mr. Wong, you've, I guess, spent some time looking at the documents associated with Water Act modernization.
Yes.
And you've worked in this area for some time on the ground.
Yes.
Do you have any comments about the proposed direction that is being contemplated in this policy document, and any suggestions which you might like to make to the Commissioner about the Water Act modernization?
Well, overarching, I think from a fisheries and oceans perspective, it's generally very positive. There's certainly many historic issues related to water management as they affect fish that will be improved once this lands. I think it doesn't mean that we think it's going to be perfect. The biggest challenge, I think, is how this lands and gets implemented, because there are lots of decent ideas in the Water Act modernization, but I don't see from where I sit currently the province or any other entity being resourced to actually follow through and deliver and ensure that the results that are contemplated in the new guidance or legislation is necessarily going to be followed through in a way that's going to achieve those objectives. So I don't say that it's impossible, but I'm not sure right now that I see all the measures in place or the means to follow through on that. There are other things like how well this may attend to historic licenses in terms of oversubscribed streams. And there's also an ongoing tension of competing priorities that other provincial agencies have, like Ministry of Agriculture, in terms of expanding agricultural production, which is often in the same valleys and watersheds that have water flow problems.
When did the Water Act modernization process start, Ms. Krywoken?
The process officially started in December 2009, early January 2010 with the release of the discussion paper. Its genesis is Living Water Smart Government's Water Plan, which was released in 2008. And in that plan, there are a number of commitments that speak to water law reform.
What is the present intention of the province in terms of a timeline for finalizing the process and having in place and enforce legislation addressing the various matters which are discussed in the policy paper?
So where we're at right now, having consulted on the policy proposal from December 2010, is further refining those proposals, drawing the input that we've received from respondents. We're identifying implications for government and users, and we'll be taking that recommendation to the minister. The minister has indicated he wishes to further engage on draft legislation in 2012, and so we're gearing towards that timeline.
Is that for engagement or for having legislation in force?
I can't speculate on timing for legislation in force. Engagement in 2012. The water plan commitment was that water law would be reformed by 2012.
Based on your observation of the staged processes that and your experience working in government, is it realistic to expect that commitment can be met?
It's possible. All the years that I've been developing various types of legislation in my career, there are many steps to the process, many decision milestones, and with an eye on the prize at the end, there's there's steps we take and processes and decision points we go through.
Mr. Wong, one of the issues that you raised in your evidence was concern about the resourcing of the province in addressing the intended direction set out in the policy paper, direction which you're supportive of. Are you aware of whether the department has taken steps to address the province with respect to those concerns, and whether it has urged the province to ensure that there is sufficient resourcing available to carry out the mandates, the new mandates, which will be put in place with the new Water Act?
I'm not aware of that. To my knowledge, the department's been fairly silent on that, leaving that to the domain of the province.
I'm going to turn now to ask some questions about BC Hydro projects. Mr. Higgins, you've been avoiding questions so far, so I'm going to turn to you and give you a chance to weigh in a little bit. You were present at the hearings yesterday.
I was.
You heard Dr. Bradford discuss, set out for the Commissioner the various BC Hydro projects that are in place in the Fraser watershed.
I did.
And did he do that accurately to your observation?
He did so.
And you heard him describe the various impacts, and those are impacts you're familiar with?
I am.
Okay, I'm going to then not recover that ground with you, and instead I'm going to ask you about opportunities for addressing some of the impacts. I'd like to start with the Alouette and Coquitlam example, historic blockages of sockeye runs. Has BC Hydro explored opportunities for restoring sockeye habitat and access to these areas?
We certainly have.
And have you gone so far, let's start with Alouette, have you gotten to the stage of assessing the feasibility and cost of installing some sort of apparatus that would allow fish passage both in and out?
We haven't quite got to that point, but we're on the cusp of that.
Okay. Has the work so far revealed anything with respect to the feasibility of installing a fish passage for in-migrating and out-migrating sockeye?
So with fish passage, we're very interested in first demonstrating the biological feasibility, and the work that's been done so far has shown that there's a good potential that this could be the case, and now we would turn to the engineering feasibility of that.
I wonder if you can just address for the Commissioner some of the challenges associated with trying to retrofit passage to allow both in-migration and out-migration. Accepting that, well, I'll allow you to address it.
Addressing fish passage is a highly site-specific issue. It has to take into consideration the characteristics, behavior, and habitat condition of the species present and the habitat conditions that are available. Part of the problem is ensuring that you need to ensure that there's adequate upstream. The habitats upstream will be used, and there will be fish that will use those. So you have to make sure that you have a populations that's showing up at the dam that will use habitats. The next step is really you need to assess whether the habitats are there to produce a viable population. And this would not only be spawning habitats, but you would need to have a productive rearing habitats available. So once those general characteristics are in place, then you must be looking at how not only how do you get the fish in, but how you get the fish out. And getting fish in is a very difficult issue because behaviorally the fish are not accustomed to ascending engineered structures. So in some cases that's very difficult to accomplish. And then you need to ensure that they can migrate through the reservoir, the storage reservoir that's been created to find those spawning habitats. And then as juveniles, being anadromous and requiring to go out to sea, you need to be able to get those fish down safely, because with the bringing the fish up into the reservoir, you now have a legal obligation to get those fish out safely.
Looking at the Alouette Dam, can you give the Commissioner any indication as to potential cost that might be associated with putting in place the infrastructure necessary to allow passage in and out?
The costs are very difficult to estimate, you know, and it also depends how you define cost. So, you know, the way I think of cost is first of all the studies that are required to ensure that you have an application that would likely be successful. You need to consider the design of the facility, the construction of the facility, and the construction of the downstream works to ensure that fish can pass safely. The costs vary from structure to structure. There has been a preliminary estimate, which I don't have the details for the Alouette. For the structure itself, would be in the range of $3 million, but I'm not sure that that's really the case, because I look at similar dams where fishways have recently been completed. For instance, Thompson Falls in Montana, which is approximately the same height. The cost is more in the range of $7.5 to about $10 million. So that's just that. So the cost of the structure. The studies usually are in the range of about $1 million. And the cost of ensuring downstream passage, we haven't addressed. Safe downstream passage, we haven't fully addressed at Alouette, but that could, the range of the structures could be equal to that are required for maintaining upstream passage.
Okay. With respect to the Coquitlam site, what's the state of BC Hydro's assessment of the feasibility and cost of addressing that dam and potential fish passage?
Well, the studies are currently underway to address, as I said before, the biological feasibility, and I think that the commissioner did hear some evidence yesterday on the relative level of success. There's great hope, but the biological success has not yet been demonstrated. As far as the costs of producing a structure that will get those fish up, I have seen costs in the range of preliminary costs in the range of $7.5 million to $10 million, but I have not seen the details of how those costs were pulled together. So I don't. It's in the right range.
Okay, thank you. There's also been some exploration, I understand, of a possible fish passage at the Wilsey Dam in the Shuswap area. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I wonder if you can explain the thinking behind that potential addition and what it might open up potentially in terms of habitat for sockeye.
Sockeye historically didn't ascend above Shuswap Falls, so the dam is not built, is not necessarily blocking passage. It's the falls that block the passage, and there has been plans contemplated since the early 1990s to improve passage up the falls particularly for other species, coho and chinook in particular. Sockeye, we are aware that sockeye do accumulate below the falls, and in years of high abundance, and in recent years we've seen large numbers there. So we figure there's some potential that there would be sockeye that could use spawning habitat above the falls. The falls are they're approximately a 12-meter rise over about 61 meters, and I think early cost estimates derived back in that period in the 90s was in the range of $5 million to blast out that fishway or blast out the falls to create a series of pools at which the fish could ascend.
Thank you. I wonder if you could explain to the Commissioner BC Hydro's Bridge Coastal Restoration Program.
The Bridge Coastal Restoration Program was developed and started in 1999, and it's a program to compensate for the footprint impacts of the development of hydro facilities in the coastal region of the province. There are similar projects that occur in the interior, in the Columbia and the Peace, and this was to address facilities in the coastal region. The model for it, it's governed by a collaborative group that consists of a 9-member board, which has representatives from the regulatory agencies, DFO and the Ministry of Environment, members of environmental groups, and First Nations and BC Hydro. The program works on an endowment of about $1.7 million annually, and it's a competitive process for a bid process for projects to improve the productive capacity of those watersheds for not only fish but also for wildlife.
I take it with a budget of $1.7 million annually that it doesn't have the capacity to fund things like fish passage projects.
Yes, that was recognized early on, and so the way that was dealt with was that we developed a partnership. BC Hydro developed a partnership with the program, whereas the program would be responsible for investigating on a preliminary basis the biological and engineering feasibility and making recommendations for BC Hydro to proceed on fish passage initiatives.
And what's the process for getting funding approved for a fish passage project?
Well, from my perspective, the project starts from before it's first conceived. So the first parts of those, ensuring the biological and preliminary biological and engineering feasibility, comes through the Bridge Coastal Program. Once there is endorsement from the board of the Bridge Coastal Program to proceed, then it is turned over to BC Hydro, and BC Hydro will do an assessment that looks at the environmental benefits, the social benefits, and the economic cost, the so-called triple bottom line approach. And then where it's deemed to have positive net benefits, there would be a recommendation that would be put to the board of directors of BC Hydro to fund the initiative.
Thank you. You heard yesterday, the Commissioner heard some reference to the water use planning process that's engaged in at BC Hydro with respect to BC Hydro facilities.
I did.
And you've been involved in that process previously?
Most certainly.
And were you involved in the water use planning process with respect to the Bridge Seton system?
Yes, I was.
To your observation, based on your experience, was that a beneficial process?
It was beneficial in a number of different ways. I think that as a group, we worked together with regulators, stakeholders, and the Statland Nation to not only develop a plan that had biological benefits, but we also were able to develop stronger relationships that have helped us to move farther forward in our management of water in that watershed.
Speaking of looking at the bridge, the Seton Dam system, you heard some of the historic concerns associated with potential impacts on sockeye discussed yesterday by Dr. Bradford.
Yes.
As a result of both engagement with various stakeholders and as a result of the water use planning process, have provisions to address some of these concerns been put in place?
Yes, they have.
I wonder, and the ones that I heard yesterday were issues with respect to homing, holding at the outflow from the generation tunnel, perhaps delay at the tail race, and entrainment issues.
Correct.
I wonder if you can just address for the Commissioner the manner in which some of these are now being addressed and provisions that are in place either in the water use plan or otherwise to address them moving forward.
So I'll start off with the getting the fish up part, the upstream passage. So the upstream passage issue, as was heard, the Commissioner heard from Dr. Bradford's testimony that it's a long-standing issue, and there was research conducted by the Salmon Commission, International Pacific Salmon Commission, in the 80s, which helped us to come to conclusion that the way that we operated the facility, the dilution ratio between the Cayush and Seton, the way that was implemented would provide benefits. And so since then, there's been attempts to meet that target dilution rate. And that was included in the water use plan, and because currently there's uncertainty on the effectiveness of that, so in the water use plan a research program was developed that would help us better understand that effectiveness and alter those ratios as required. With respect to getting the fish down, the entrainment part, there's a long history of trying to mitigate that problem. Five decades of research has been undertaken, and the most recent thing that has proven to be, which we have found that has been effective, is this shutting down the generating stations, and that has been implemented since 2006. And we're currently monitoring the effectiveness, and that program was further carried into the water use planning program.
Is this a copy of the Bridge River Power Development Water Use Plan?
Yes.
That could be the next exhibit, please.
1875.
Mr. Wong, were you also, did you also have some involvement in the water use planning process?
Not in the development of the water use plan, but because that was done before I was involved, but certainly since it's been developed, myself and my staff work with it and use it on an ongoing basis.
Okay. And do you, to your observation, based on your experience with it, is the existence of a plan and the process that was undertaken to develop it a beneficial one?
Yes, tremendous.
I'll ask perhaps then Mr. Davidson and Mr. Huang, has either the Department of Fisheries and Oceans or the province considered instituting a similar process in other areas where large withdrawals are contemplated, perhaps with respect to other hydro facilities such as independent power projects?
I think what's unique about the BC Hydro process is being that BC Hydro is a Crown corporation, they were directed by government to undertake this planning process and enabled by the Controller's Office and that kind of stuff. Directing other non-Crown corporations is a little bit more problematic. Having said that, there is a number of places that are exploring a similar water use planning process to this now. We've been engaging with a number of existing dam owners, and they've been talking about, would this work for us to resolve a number of ongoing issues that we have.
And from a fisheries and ocean side, we're not in a position or have an authority to direct that these occur, but when they are out there and there's an opportunity, we've generally found it useful to be involved and quite helpful. The Okanagan being an example where there's something we call a fish water management tool that's been very beneficial for fish as well as for other uses of water.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner, I know the time, it's 11:25. Would you like to take a short morning adjournment now?
That'd be fine, thank you. Hearing now recess for 10 minutes.